The goal is for the oppressed, right? The goal is for the oppressed to fit the world of the oppressor. And this is a very key point, and that's an actual quote, right? Fit the world of the oppressor is a quote from Freire, right? So the goal of this whole paradigm is for the oppressed to fit the world of the oppressor. And how does that look, right? How does this idea of fitting the world of the oppressor look? Well, if you think about it, it's sort of like this. I am the oppressor. There is an external world. This external world has people in it. What I do as the oppressor, right, is I create a framework. I create a framework for the external world, right? I use my imagination, if you will, and I create a framework for the external world. I create a framework for the external world. This framework contains everything that there is in the external world. What is in the external world? The world, trees, plants, animals, rivers, cars, boats, you know, that type of stuff, and people. So the entirety of the external world is comprised of two things: stuff and people. What I do as the oppressor is I create a framework. I create a framework that contains both objects in the world and people. So now I'm talking about the totality of the world, right? And what's the claim here? The goal is for the oppressed to fit the world of the oppressor. There will be those who want to get outside of this framework. I don't want to be contained within a framework that you have built for me. Right? I don't want to be contained within a framework that an oppressor has built for me. I feel, and I am trying to recognize myself as a viable human subject, as an autonomous human being, and I don't want the constraints of my life to be governed by some other human being. I don't want someone to tell me that I can't do this, or I have to do this, or, you know, the dreams that I have are ridiculous, or, you know, I should be this person when I grow up, or what have you, right? So there's going to be an attempt by those who have gained the act of recognition, and obviously we know that this is a struggle. You should know that by now. We should know that by now, right? We're struggling to attain autonomy. That struggle to attain autonomy is an attempt to get outside of the framework of the oppressor. Right? The oppressor has created a framework in which we are to exist. And the whole point of this sort of liberation theory, the whole point of this pedagogy, understanding, education of the oppressed, is to recognize that it is our, your, mine, all oppressed people's obligation to divorce ourselves from this framework, right? Because this framework is only here to possess the benefit of the oppressor, right? The oppressor technically wants to rule the world. And how does the oppressor rule the world? The oppressor rules the world by having, right, by containing everything that there is in the world is now my possession, including people. I own all of this, including people. This is all mine, right? Because as we've seen, there has been a conflation between personal identity, the identity of the oppressor, and what it is that the oppressor has, right? I am my car, I am my house, I am my lifestyle, in a sense. Okay, the oppressors are the minority, right? The next point is that oppressors are a minority. Alright, so the oppressors in general are a minority. They only make up a relatively small percentage of the actual population. The population is comprised mostly of those who are oppressed, right? The oppressed are, for example, in education, he situates this section of the discussion in terms of education and the institution of education. There are more students than there are instructors, right? The oppressor, the instructor, are fewer than the students. But those who are fewer have total control over the masses of students, right? It is, it is a faculty of 10 or 12 people who govern sort of the lives of, I don't know, a couple hundred, or maybe even a couple of thousands of students, maybe not a couple thousand, but maybe a couple hundred or so students, right? So you can see the relationship. So the oppressors are a minority, and then obviously the oppressed are the majority, right? So they're more oppressed than oppressors. He specifically calls the oppressor the dominant minority. The dominant, D-O-M-I-N-A-N, the dominant minority. He calls the dominant minority the oppressor, right? The dominant minority. Why are they a minority? Because there are more teachers than there are students, right? Why are they dominant? Because the control, the power is with that particular minority, right? So the dominant minority is basically another name for the oppressor in Freire. The dominant minority, right? The dominant minority prescribe behavior and compliance for the oppressed. So what the dominant minority does is that they prescribe behavior, compliance, for whom? For the oppressed. Right? The dominant minority prescribes behavior, conformity for the oppressed. Through this prescriptive act, what they hope to do is to change the oppressed from human beings, basically, into objects for control. Right? That's the whole point of this, right? I want to rob you, human being, of your autonomy, of your individuality, and impose, prescribe, conformity to the point that your mind is nothing more than an object for my manipulation. Right? The very fact that we know this now as oppressed people should lead us to want to immediately revolt, right? You should feel, if you understand what's being said, right? You should feel that at any instant that I feel that someone is attempting to control my mind, literally, right? By, by rhetoric, by slogans, by whatever manner of mind control that there is, right? And this doesn't have to be spooky, right? We're not talking about supernatural stuff. We're talking about just good old conversation to get people to conform. I need to recognize that I'm an autonomous human being and that the control of my mind is my own, right? You cannot enslave your mind to the subjugation of others, as Bob Marley says in my favorite line of all time, emancipate yourself from mental slavery, right? None but ourselves can free our minds, right? So this process of emancipating our minds, right, is our own obligation, right? None but ourselves can go through this process of emancipating our mind.